Okay, welcome everybody. Now we start with educational part of our blockchain week. And I would like to make some introductory points. As you know, the European Commission launched a telecom CEF call for blockchain last year. So we, as a Ministry of Economic Development and Technology, applied for this project, for this call for projects, and we received the positive response from the Commission. So the project is now confirmed, and this is one of the educational workshops that we are going to implement through the series of trainings for EPSI installations and nodes. I have to say that our project is divided into 4 phases. First phase is the opening of EPSI node. EPSI is European Blockchain Services Infrastructure, which we started to build together with the European Commission in 2020, or 19 and 20, and then now it is waiting for the production phase. So the steps that we were obliged to do were to get the links how to integrate with EPSI on the government level. We know that mostly the nodes are opened on the in the area of institutions, mostly in sub-governmental level, but we decided to open this at the ministry level. So we needed to get some allowances and some entry points, as our system is very protected. And then now we have 3 IP addresses under which we can open that nodes. After that, we are obliged to upload at least 3 use cases. Use cases are, first use case is self-sovereign identity. The second use case is diplomas on blockchain, and the third was supposed to be a traceability or notarization, but now when we have some different circumstances, we will try to make our national e-notarization case or e-notary together with the Ministry of Justice, and to build some other use cases also through early adopters project or program. The third thing is what we are obliged to do is implementing the trainings. But first, and as today is the first training, there will be explained how EPSI is operating, what are the functionalities, what is the purpose of EPSI, and how we can use it for public services. The second thing is that we are going to implement a series of workshops and trainings on which public administration will be able to get familiar with blockchain technology and what is it about. The third thing is that we are planning to develop our national use cases that will also be able to onboard either on our national infrastructures. As you heard earlier, we have our C-chain, our national infrastructure, and also with the integration of EPSI also there. We have here 4 partners at the ministry level. This is Ministry of Public Administration and the Ministry of Justice and Ministry of Education for diploma use cases. Then we have a national registry for the national business registry, which will be able together with us to onboard the use case of e-identity of the companies. Third, very important partners are from academic sector, and this is University of Ljubljana and University of Maribor. You will hear their presentations later on, and we will divide the trainings between those two universities, faculties for computer sciences and for informatics. Also, the PR activities are foreseen, so soon we will publish all the activities on the special page linked to our Ministry of Economic Development page, and you will be able sorry, to read about all the materials, about all the activities on the project, and how we open the nodes for EPSI, and we will also offer the help desk for online information or for help to the ministries, institutions, and all of them. I have to tell something else. We are planning for to open another 7 to 8 nodes as we were able to ensure the funding from RRF, so the funding from Recovery and Resilience Plan that was approved in July for Slovenia. So if I present how the workshop will go on, first we have, but I have to check, Pietro is here, okay, and Pietro will, as a convener of EPSI technical group in EBP, he will present more in detail the functionalities of EPSI, what is it for, and how we can use this. Then Muhamed Turkanovic, a professor from University of Maribor, he will present the process of opening the node, because they were the first in Slovenia that opened the node for EPSI, and also that they are very engaged in preparing the production phase. Mr. Vlado Stankovski will present blockchain trainings as such, so on general level, and what we will focus going with EPSI more in depth. So I would like Pietro, if you are with us, to join us and start the presentation.
Hello, good morning, everybody. I'm from space, and we are not aliens, but we are working for new technologies in order to make our European Union a better union, hopefully give our citizens a better technological background and technological support for their lives. So if you don't mind, I'll share my screen to make a very, very short presentation that will help us to go together with a very short journey to understand what EPSI is and how does it work. So as Nina was pointing out, since few years we are working for the pan-European infrastructure. Why that? Because this infrastructure will support Europe and European services to be really cross-border. So how does it work then? And this is has already been anticipated by Nina as well. Please be aware that the numbers and the colors are not representative. It's just an easy way to show how does it work, but they're not exactly now up to date and updated. The idea is to have a very high number of nodes across Europe that will be able to sustain a proper infrastructure to run blockchain-based services. Now, this infrastructure by design has to have all the characteristics that a public infrastructure may have to support public services. Nevertheless, in future, we hope that we will be able to include rapidly also private services, because the private sector would be able also to enlarge the customer base and to add services to our citizens, because most of the time citizens do not know or do not understand or don't want to know at the end of the story if a service is public or private. They want that service, they want to consume it, and they want a seamless experience. So as you see, we are a little bit larger than the European Union, as we have 29 countries, and we hope in future to have strong cooperation with other countries and with other nations outside Europe in order to provide services that go one step ahead. Going to the next slide, if the presentation allows me. So we say that EBS is designed to be a market-friendly blockchain ecosystem. Why we call ecosystem, not just network? Because we do not want to provide a simple network that would have been easy and would have been taking a couple of months to set it up. But we want to create an ecosystem where there are standards, where there is a governance model that is transparent, so everyone knows what's going on, what are the rules, and they are based on 5 key principles. So at the end, we must do it for the public good. So there is no economical interest in what we're doing, and the network will be and is at the end, as for today, is for free for usage. The governance, as we said, should be done through consensus, and the governance model is being worked out as we speak. We have a lot of work done for that, and you may understand that the governance model is unique in the world. There is up to now no infrastructure like a blockchain, so decentralized with the characteristics of EBSI in the world. So even the governance model is innovative and is based on European values at the end. And this is at the top right, we see. So harmonization. So we want to have technical requirements that are interoperable and compliant with the others in the way that we don't have roadblocks when 2 nations or 2 countries want to join together to create a new service. It must be open source, because this is one of the European values that we have. So we don't want to have infrastructure where we have a private company or private licensing company that controls somehow directly or indirectly what we're doing. So open source is one of the key elements. And at the end, but it's not the least important, but it is one of the most important elements on building an infrastructure that is based on values and framework. What does it mean? The simple example is GDPR. One of the big issues when we run on a public blockchain, or more the issues, questions that anyone raise when you run a public blockchain is, how does it comply with the GDPR, with the privacy of our citizens? So EBS is built by design to be compliant with the GDPR. This is one of the key elements of our infrastructure. And has been a long journey, even because we had to discover new things. We had to try. I believe we have the 2.5 version in our infrastructure, as we made even major changes. And this job was not just a technical job, but it was a technical job that was required to comply with one side, an innovation element as blockchain, from the other side, all the rules and regulations, and also way of living in Europe. So going a little bit one step ahead from technological point of view, we had designed the architecture with a multi-level or multi-tier architecture that extends a little bit the classical or the typical stack when we are talking about infrastructure. We have the TCP/IP, sorry, they have famous stack on when we are talking about how the TCP/IP is structured, and we have ISO stacks. So this is not new that we have stack to define an infrastructure. A little bit difference is that this stack has been applied to a blockchain. So also that was a little bit one step ahead of, and one thing we have to be proud of, because we designed something that is, I believe, will be followed by other nations and other infrastructure in the philosophy and in the way we structure it. So our stack that we go, I would like to explain directly the one on the right side, is built on the layers that you see. So at the bottom layer, you have the bare infrastructure. So what do you mean? We mean that there is the physical layer, I would say, the physical blockchain, the software you run on your servers, that is in line and is standard, as we say, is open source. It's standard somehow. Why I say somehow? Because there's configurations that are set up for implementing the regulations and the EU regulation that need to change the configuration of the infrastructure. But the infrastructure, I would say, it's we didn't change the source code of the infrastructure. It's barely in line with what we can find when you download any the internet, the open source code of such infrastructure. Why I don't specify which? Because we want to be multi-ledger, and we are going to be multi-ledger. We're working to have this infrastructure not as a single block of one technology, but as a multi-technology element. So different technologies that will run in parallel. On top of it, there is chain and storage. So somehow the smart contract layers that runs on top on each, I would say not all of them, but most of the infrastructure, the blockchain infrastructure we know about. And one of the key elements is the yellow layer that we call core services. What does it mean? These core services are the one they're required for any entity running on EBSI to be able to play with it somehow, okay? What does it mean play with it? Be able to interact with infrastructure in the way the infrastructure is supposed to be. And you may, what does it mean? It's supposed to be interoperable. So we want that each service, for example, there's define an identity within our infrastructure, define the identity in a way that is open to others to be used. Okay. So we don't want to have the situation where in Germany we have an identity, in Italy we have an identity, and the two identities, they do not match with each other logically, I don't say physically. So we had to have a way by design to give interoperability to these services. But not only that, the way we store the data, we store the certification, all the use cases, my colleagues will be giving you details after we speak. So somehow the core services somehow really EBSI is the piece of technology that we put on top of the chain that allows to be interoperable, to protect the citizens' privacy, and to implement the key elements that are now present in EBSI. On top of it, what is the typical business application layers where use cases will be built and where public and in future private entities will be placing their applications. So in that layer is really the business running in EBSI. So we want to be standard, I would say we want to be compliant, we want to harmonize technology for the public good and based on the elements that we saw in the previous slide. So, which are the core services? At the end, it's a big question because I just gave a small hint about the identity, but the core services are the ones that are common. We want them to be common, and they are supposed to grow. Now there are some core services, but in future we expect to have more and more. So even by what's going on in other areas with the IDAS regulation and with the mandate of our EU Parliament, we need to define an identity core service. So what does it mean in detail? So we have libraries for defining how a credential, so what does it mean? The representation identity is done. How the valuable verifiable presentation, how means how do I present my credential to a third party? Because I can have my own data, and I believe Daniel will explain very well this. When I have my identity, I may decide to share only part of it. So to present just a slice of my identity. So we have these libraries to enable application to use the identity, to present the identity of third party, and so forth. And to use what we call, not we call because this is a standard that comes from W3C, the DAD, so the Decentralized Identifiers. These are like URLs because they are like URLs, but they are not like URLs in how they're built, but they are like URLs in the way they are meant to be, that identify each element within EBSI. As the URL on a website identify the website, the page, or the element within the page, or the element within the website, the DIDs identify all the elements that are playing within EBSI. Why we want to identify? Because we want to be sure that nobody tampers with our infrastructure, put fake data, and the source of data is trusted. Then we have the wallet libraries. We know that Europe has defined a roadmap for our wallet, and we have the libraries to support the implementation of national or cross-border wallets. So again, I want to sign in transactions, I want to have a key management service and so forth. Why we want to build libraries? Because we do not want to create a new application for the user, but to enable third parties, that public or private, to build their own application. But for us, the key element is they had to talk in the same language so that we can understand each other and facilitate such kind of interoperability that is required mostly in any digital application in Europe. Then you have for sure security, that is a key element when you have public infrastructure. Public means public administration, and public in the way that is open like the web. And we want to have other APIs that are very important when you run, for example, some public-oriented services. For example, a timestamp. I want to know that this transaction has been done at a certain time. We want to have a storage. Maybe we give a storage, maybe not. The storage is a model that will be based on the type of service we run, and so forth. I don't want to read you all of them. So at the end, the rule is to have integration and interoperability across the ledger. So then we have, how do we run this? Some of these are run through smart contracts. So we have the smart contracts that run the previous APIs that we saw in the previous slide and allow a smaller, higher level of integration. For example, we have the trust registries, and then will be explained again later on, so I don't want to give details, are the source of truth somehow, are the ones that tells you that this information or this entity is a trusted entity that stores or issues transaction in our blockchain. Then we have pluggable protocols because we want to have, as I said before, multiple protocols. For sure, we need to monitor what's going on. We have the monitoring tools that are needed to monitor from security point of view, but also from usage point of view or infrastructure. And we have an off-chain storage that may or may not be used. I put always a question mark on this because this is not, we're not, let's say, Gaia X. We don't want to create storage services, but we may need some chain or off-chain storage for some specific use cases. So simple, and I want to go very fast. Why we want to build on top of it? Because we are compliant with all, I would say, as we said, the European regulations. We are secure, efficient, cross-border by design, for sure, trustful, we saw the trust registers, and auditable. So we are open and the network is open for audit in cases now on it. And sorry, came 2 slides. So I want to cut short because I want to give space to my colleagues. So for further details, we are open for you to give us, to ask for more questions and to connect to the EBSI website and to make any inquiry, or go through Nina at the end, because she is one of our key stakeholders for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pietro. We received one question within questions and answers. Even if Mohammed responded, the question was, what is the main language that we are using in EPSI? And if you can give us feedback, and then I will invite Mohammed to present the opening of the node and all the procedures that we need to go through to establish the node for EPSI. Thank you.
Simply, we do not want to stick with one language. So at the moment, the first infrastructure, the first ledger we are running with is Hyperledger Besu, who is a permissioned version of Ethereum. So any application that runs on Ethereum will run on EBSI. But we're working very hard to include Fabric, and there is a list of infrastructure, among one, the Slovenian one, that we want to add. So we don't want to stick with any specific technology. We give freedom for the people that runs application to run with their own preferred language and preferred application development tools. Thank you.
Hello. So thank you also from my side to the organizers, especially Nina, for inviting me. Also, great talk to Pietro. If I may continue with my talk, I hope also you see my slides. I see on the TVs that you see my slides. So I will explain you shortly the EPSI node from the Slovene perspective, as I will try not to repeat myself too much. So the idea, as Pietro already said, of EPSI is to accelerate the creation of cross-border services and put blockchain at the service of public administrations. And we will, of course, and I will try to, of course, put slightly the light on why would we also need such public administration service supported by blockchain on the EU level. But first of all, just to remember that what actually is the European blockchain service infrastructure, and it was, as it was already explained by the previous presenter, it's a consortium of blockchain nodes supported by each member state and even more, which is interconnected and is there to support the public administration on the whole EU level, as well as, of course, also on the national, regional, and local levels. So the business cases were already presented. The main purpose is that the public administration has the possibility to protect its services and data from fraud, increase trust, increase sharing of data, and to be cost effective. Well, what will the citizens gain? You will see slightly when the use cases will be presented by myself at the end and shortly, but of course with other presenters who will talk after me. So what is the infrastructure layer and what are the EPSI nodes? So the idea of a blockchain network is, as you already probably know, is that we can have a permissionless blockchain network, like the cryptocurrency networks like Bitcoin, and other cryptocurrency, Ethereum cryptocurrencies, but we can also have permissioned blockchain networks or consortium blockchain networks, however you want to call them. And a permissioned blockchain network is not open for everybody, but it is sometimes available for the public and supports some use cases and applications. And the European blockchain service infrastructures, its idea was to build on the EU level a blockchain network between nodes, which however are verified and certified by EU member state. So each EU member state, and of course additional others, as was already mentioned, has their own blockchain node, which is then connected to the European Commission's blockchain node and every other blockchain node on the EPSI layer itself. So the idea is that we have let's say, a verified blockchain network between EU member states. And if you know maybe the eIDAS network, it is something similar to that, where each member state hosts and has its own eIDAS node. Here is the same, where each member state has its own EPSI node. So as it was already presented, I will take this picture and explain to you that when you have such a blockchain network as the EPSI nodes in each member state, well, you set up, of course, a network layer, which is supposed the interfaces for the peer-to-peer connection, etc. So now on the EU level, we have this network layer where each member state's nodes is connected with each other, as it is with the blockchain networks. Then we have, of course, the chain layer. Why is this important? Is if I come back to the question, which language does the EPSI support? As Pietro already said, the idea of EPSI is not to support one specific language, or there is no one ring to rule them all, but to use those blockchains which are the most, let's say, robust and which are most efficient and enabled to support various scenarios. Meaning that by setting up a blockchain node at each member state, each node actually will run multiple blockchains. As it is in the current state, it runs Hyperledger Besu, which we know as Ethereum previously, and Hyperledger Fabric. In the future, each blockchain node will probably host additional chains, meaning that you will have a network layer between, let's say, hosts connected to each other. These are EPSI nodes, but each EPSI node will run multiple, let's say, blockchain nodes, which are either Hyperledger Besu, either Hyperledger Fabric, and we know also that IOTA and others are joining soon. Meaning that that's why we have the separate chain layer. And in this case, you will have on one chain one type of data, on the other chain another type of data, or maybe there will be duplicates on data on each chain of such. And then we have an EPSI external interfaces layer, which is there for support a communication between the EPSI and other third-party systems. And then we have the EPSI core service layer, because you have what we have now is the EPSI as a network, EPSI as a chain layer, and now we want to build on use cases where these use cases are using the blockchain. Think about it that you are now building a decentralized app for your use case, be it a diploma use case or anything what you want. Well, you cannot just connect to a blockchain, which is run by the member states. Well, you will do this through these core services API layers, where you will get access to, and then you will choose on which case and in which form you will communicate with the EPSI layer. And then, of course, we have the EPSI application layer with all the use cases, which we talk about later on. So I will just shortly explain the Slovenian EPSI node timeline. As you may know, the European Blockchain Partnership started in 2018, starting also to build up on all these infrastructure layer. And in March 2018, the Slovene node was set up as the fourth in the EPSI network. And with the permission of the Ministry of Economic Development and Technology and the auspices of Ms. Nena Dokuzel, the first Slovene EPSI node, the version 1, which we know it was in 2018, was set up by the University of Maribor, that is my affiliation, within our blockchain laboratory. So in March 2021, EPSI upgraded to version 2, their nodes to version 2, and in March 2021, we as the University of Maribor, who are now actually hosting the Slovene EPSI node, have upgraded to EPSI version 2, and to the best of my knowledge, also all the member states have already also updated to the EPSI version 2 nodes, which support additional functionalities and services as such. We are kind of proud to be the first one to have been able to automatically upgrade from version 1 to version 2, which was later on also used with other member states. And in 2022, as Ms. Dokuzo already said, the Slovene node will be shifted from our university to the Ministry of Economic Development and Technology. So what are some technicalities that you would need to know about the EPSI nodes? Well, each EPSI version 2 requires a minimum of 3 virtual hosts, and they all need to have access to the internet, and of course, an individual fixed IP version 4 public IP address. And at the University of Maribor, we are actually running them on virtual machines, which is also possible. You don't have to have dedicated servers for this. So we are running it on virtual machines in a self-hosted data center infrastructure at our university. And before joining to the EPSI network, all 3 hosts have to pass technical checks, which are done by the EPSI core technical team. And if all technical checks are passed, and all the minimum requirements are respected, then this node is actually allowed to join as a member state's EPSI node to the network of EPSI nodes. So each EPSI node, actually each virtual host, and we know we have 3 of those. Why do we have 3 of those? Is because one of them is actually will run an all-in-one EPSI full stack node for version 2, which is for pilot environment, and it is already accessible on the preprod epsi.eu domain. And then the second one is the same, but an EPSI full stack node for version 2 production environment, and the third one is of course for test environment. And as you join, as you may join the network as an EPSI member state EPSI node, you go through these phases, joining first on the test environment, then on the pre-prod, and then on the production, while the current use cases are run on the pre-prod and will soon be shifted towards the production environment as such. So this is an older picture, but what also one from the technicalities is that each EPSI node actually provides 2 operation options. It can be run over an OVA image for VMware, or it can be run on the KVM-based systems using QCO2. But it's also, we have at the University of Maribor, we didn't have any of those 2 available, and we stick with Hyper-V, and we were also able to run everything, all the hosts on Hyper-V, and it was already also possible. So on the left side, you see actually how this EPSI node actually is run through the firewall and actually runs through 3 types of containers. It also runs Cassandra, if you know probably Cassandra, for other, let's say, maintenance options. So as I said, currently each EPSI node hosts actually Hyperledger Besu, the, let's say, enterprise version of Ethereum. It runs Hyperledger Fabric, and it also runs Cassandra. So some of the requirements for each computer host, well, it needs to have some minimum requirements. As I said previously, it needs to have 4 core CPUs, equivalent to some data center CPU, 32 gigabytes of RAM for each of the hosts for the pre-prod, pilot, and the test. And it has to have at least 80 gigabits of SSD for the operation system and 256 gigabit for the data volume. As well, it has to operate under the minimum requirements of the network specifications, having 3 fixed public IP addresses, 100 megabits seconds for bandwidth, maximum latency of 50 milliseconds, and 1 gigabit Ethernet local network. So these are the minimum requirements for each member state and each blockchain EPSI node to be actually verified and to pass these technical requirements. So as I explained, this is the core technical infrastructure layer, and it was set up by all the member states, and in Slovenia it will be now again set up by the ministry. So once you have these infrastructure layer and you have these services through these APIs and interfaces, well, now people and pilots and projects can now use these services through so-called pilots. And of course, as you see here, there are a lot of pilots, like to use identity data to put some parts of it, like decentralized identifiers, etc., on the blockchain, birth certificates, health certificates, etc. And in Slovenia, at least at our university, University of Maribor, we are actually piloting with the diploma use case within the Digital Europe for All Horizon 2020 project. And as well, already Mrs. Ducuso explained, there is now the early adopters wave, where there are, I think Daniel Lesul will correct me, but I think there are like 7 or 9 pilot projects, where each of them is piloting one of the cases. And we are actually one of those pilot projects. And what we will do is we will actually issue and validate certificates for students and use them in a case. So I will not go into detail because this is something that I will also be representing, I guess, in 2 days on a separate workshop. But our project builds on 3 countries, Slovenia, Spain, and Portugal. The idea is that using now our self-sovereign identity solution, Slovene students will be able to sign to university in Spain. Spanish students will be able to sign to university in Slovenia, and also vice versa with Portugal. So how is this actually provided, and where do we see now EPSI? Well, as you see here, this is just a screenshot of the enrollment application for study in Slovenia, and it is now actually upgraded by the Ministry of Science, Education and Sport in Slovenia. It is actually updated with the verifiable credential pattern. It uses the SSI authority agent that we have built, and we have a separate mobile application for students. So the idea is that students will go to this enrollment application for study. So Slovene students will go to the Slovene ministry, connect to this Slovene ministry, and get a verifiable credential diploma on their phone, and later on use the same type of communication with the Spanish and Portuguese ministry to send the verifiable accreditation type of diploma to them. So where is EPSI here? Well, you need to know that once a ministry in Slovenia issues a verifiable credential, it will sign this verifiable credential with a digital signature. And when now the Spanish ministry receives such verifiable credential, it needs to verify that this signature is actually really from the Ministry of Slovenia. So here comes EPSI in place. By actually installing such authority agents at the ministry level, they will store their decentralized identifier and public information on EPSI services. And each time anybody wants to verify that such a verifiable credential was signed by an authorized authority and trusted issuer in this case, those agents will communicate with EPSI and say, okay, is this issuer a university, and was it approved by the member state as such? So here is such an example where we have students on the left. We have a portal like the Slovene Ministry's portal. We have an authority agent which actually is run by the ministry itself. And this authority agent communicates constantly with the EPSI layer to verify that these issuers are really on the registry's list. So I won't go into much details. This was a short explanation about the EPSI infrastructure and a simple use case that we will build on. And this is, of course, the team and our technologies that we are actually using. I thank you very much for listening, and should there be any questions, I'm free to discuss them.
Thank you, Muhammad. I believe that all the questions that we are receiving through questions and answers have been already answered. Thank you for the presentation. I hope that we will meet soon in person also, but for the next trainings, I hope that you will also be available. Now I would like to invite Professor Vlado Stankovski to join me here and to present how they are focusing on blockchain trainings and education, what programs do they have, and what the University of Ljubljana can provide to EPSI trainings for installing the infrastructure and use cases. Thank you. Please, Vlado.
Thank you, Madam Dokuzov. First of all, thank you very much to Nena Dokuzov and Tadej Slapnik to invite us to this esteemed activities related to the European blockchain services infrastructure. So at the Faculty of Computer and Information Science in Ljubljana, we are engaged in a couple of blockchain-related projects, and also in projects related to the improvement of software skills in the industry. And for example, we are part of the European Software Skills Alliance project, in which we are engaged in the conception of new study courses that are meant to improve software skills. And in particular, for us, it's important that we focus on new technologies, such as the Internet of Things, AI, orchestration technologies, so technologies that fall in the context of cloud-to-edge computing, digital twins, and of course blockchains. So we also participate in two European projects. One is European Korean project called Decenter, that is integrating this type of technologies in order to deliver a new fog computing and brokerage platform. And the other project is the next generation internet project called On-to-Chain, which is funded under the program of blockchain for the next generation internet. So we would like to, in the course of this engagement with the deployment of the European blockchain services infrastructure, we are focusing on use cases that are quite interesting also for us, and in relation to the ministries of the Slovenian government, such as, for example, the Ministry for Public Administration. So there are quite a lot of use cases that are of great interest, and also in the other projects in which we are involved, such as use cases related to cross-border data and AI model management, then use cases related to the notarization of services, then use cases related to the deployment of applications for the self-sovereign identity model. So we heard in the presentation of my colleague Professor Turkanovic from the University of Maribor, they have already implemented a use case for the enrollment of students that utilizes blockchain, self-sovereign identity type of application. Then there are use cases related to notaries and diplomas, trusted data sharing, social security passports, asylum, SME support, and so on, that are currently being investigated and will soon be added to the portfolio of the services of the European blockchain services infrastructure. Also, in the context of the On-to-Chain project, we investigate plenty of use cases that would have potentially great impact, that are related to sustainability, energy efficiency, and finally, last but not the least, human rights. Because what we feel today is that there are many big companies that are governing the information that is distributed and sent to the people. So what we want to see is much greater participation of people by democratic means in the generation of knowledge and content on the internet that is more trustworthy, and it fits in the context of the human-centered internet, which is also promoted by the Horizon Europe program. So at this point, this is all from our side. We will engage in the activities related to the deployment and the education of how to use these services. and we are looking forward to learning more on the impacts of this type of digitalization on the public services and also the wider services that are provided to the citizens of Slovenia and beyond. So thank you very much again.
Okay, thank you very much, Vlado. Okay, we received a couple of questions and answers, and what I think is even if there was a replay given in a chat, maybe we can go live also with the answers, because everybody shall hear the answers on the questions. So first, what happened to the import one-stop shop use case? The second, are you planning or have already started to cooperate with the blockchain service network? And the third, the current model of EPSI implies a consortial model, permissioned participation in DLT maintenance, as well as permissioned access as a blockchain client. At the same time, EPSI will be essentially a pan-European public utility. I have to say that not only public in the future, maybe also for the private use cases. Will the general public have at least read access to the various underlying ledgers? I hope that all the three speakers will be able to respond to these questions. So maybe we can start. Pietro, are you still with us? Maybe you can replay to the second and third question. So import one-stop shop use case and cooperation with the blockchain service network. And then access for wider public. And then Muhammad, and then Vlado. Vlado, if you can come here, maybe just to emphasize, and but we go this direction. First Pietro, then Muhammad, and then Vlado here. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So, on the one shot, I have to say that I'm not details in this use case, so please, we can rely on the use case conveners, because they are more aware of each detail use case, while I'm more on the technology and infrastructure part. Regarding the questions, we are, EBSI by design is multi-ledger. So means there is the capability to host and to run more than one ledger at the same time, has been already explained also from my colleagues. And in this case, there is no problem on integrating, adding, or cooperating with another network. Now, what does it mean integrating, adding, and cooperating is another story, because there are so many different possibilities that we have a process to evaluate the integration with external networks. And this process have two levels, I would say. One is understanding what kind of integration we are seeking or envisioning. And the second is checking what compliancy level we have and what is the gap between the aim and the actual status to plan an integration. At the moment, we run this for a couple of ledgers, but we need to wait our final version to go live to be sure that we are not working on wrong, let's say, setup. So the process is there. It's just not finalized as I started anyway, because we need to go live to ensure our requirements before understanding what would be the gap, the final gap analysis with the others. But this is in our DNA to have multi-ledger capabilities, so no doubt. I don't think there were other questions for me, so in case I will leave the word to my colleagues to answer the following ones. Thank you.
So there was one more question. which was related to the plans of integrating or cooperating with the blockchain service network. So here the answer is that this infrastructure is meant as something that can evolve in the future. So this means that working on common interoperability principles is important for the EPSI. And this means that in the future, if we find compatibility with the blockchain service network, that would be possible to cooperate. But at this point, I cannot, we haven't looked into details, so I cannot say yes or no. Anyhow, there are plenty of upcoming technologies that we know from the On-to-Chain project that are related to level 2 side chains and other technologies that can make quite a lot of interoperable solutions and interchain communication very possible and actually welcome for many applications. So thanks.
If I may add, there was also one question. If the public will have at least read access to various underlying ledgers. And also if it will only be for public or also private institutions, as Ms. Dokuzo already said, currently it's for public, but later on it will be also available for private institutions. Regarding the read access, currently the read access, it is and will be available for the public through the EPSI core interface layer. However, the write access will, of course, at least to the best of my knowledge, be always checked and verified through the EPSI management layer, because if I just may explain through the diploma use case, where you have a trusted issuer registry, so the institutions which issue you a diploma, or maybe an institution which issues you identity card or something like that. Well, it is highly, let's say, important registry, and as such, it will only be available that you sign transactions and put information onto such registries through verified profiles. So only verified profiles will be able to do this. But more on this information, I guess it can and will be explained by Daniel de Sul in the next workshop at 12 or 12:15. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for all the participants for at the first part of this training or workshop. Now I propose to have 15 minutes break and then continue with the use cases. Please join us within the presentation of the use cases. Daniel will be the first, and then the others. I will make an introduction after 15 minutes. Thank you. Okay, we can start with the second part of our workshop. Now we will have the presentation of use cases, and I would like to ask Daniel de Sul to start with the presentation. And then first self-sovereign identity use case, after that diplomas use case with Henny Bulstra, and Benoit with the social security application for EPSI and use case. Thank you very much. I will not interrupt you in between, but in the end, we will go through questions and answers. Thank you. Please, Daniel.
Okay. Good morning or afternoon already. I'm very happy to be together with my colleagues Henny Belstra and also Benoit Beloos here in presenting the session. Unfortunately, not in Slovenia. So next time you owe us this, Nina. Next time we'll come happily to Slovenia. But as mentioned, we'll go into the EPSI use cases. You have seen now the introduction, what is the EPSI infrastructure, and now together with my colleagues, I will dive into that topic. I will share my screen. No, I hope that's the case. Okay, so as mentioned, the European Blockchain Service Infrastructure is not only about infrastructure, it's also about use cases. And this session, which will last 1 hour and a half, will guide you through the EPSI use cases to get some info and also learn how to interact and pilot with member states as public administration and their partners. This is not a really technical session. We'll see how the business aspect is, but of course is a starting point to get more technical. And of course, discuss potential involvement of public, Slovenian public sector, and potentially also private sector partners that also included. So that's also our objective. As mentioned, we are doing this presentation together with the 2 other colleagues. So I'm doing this with 2 others. My name is Daniel Dussey. I'm convener for the European Self-Sovereign Identity Framework, working within the Belgium government, but focused on this use case. As mentioned, it is a partnership, so member states do collaborate with the Commission to build this. Maybe Henny, you can also briefly present you.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Greetings from Groningen, that's the north part of the Netherlands. As Daniel was mentioning, I really hope to join you in the future face-to-face. I'm the convener together with Luis Arino Martin for the diplomas use case, and I will tell you something about the educational credentials and the added value of EPSI. So, Benoit, would you like to introduce yourself shortly, please?
Yes, with pleasure, Annie. Thank you. And thank you, Daniel. I'm Benoit Beloos. I'm the Deputy Head of the Social Security Coordination Unit of DG Employment at the European Commission. And I'm also the co-convener of the EBSI ESPAS project, together with Stefano Cascone, who's working for INPS, which is a very large Italian social security institution. And indeed, I will have the pleasure to present what it is about and what we want to achieve. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Indeed, the agenda is a bit formed in this way. So a brief introduction on EPSI use cases, but Mohammed and also Pietro have already done that. Then we'll be first diving a bit into the new paradigm of social self-sovereign identity and the possibilities for public sector. Then Henny will jump in and do the added value on the educational credential students. We'll move on to Benoit and improve how social security can use those new topics and new concepts into their decentralized approach. Then we will not only give information, but then we point out how we could join those kind of pilots. Benoit will also mention the first on the social security, and then Henny and myself will go into the early adopters on identity and education. And of course, as Nina has mentioned, we'll be open, of course, to Q&A to all your questions that you have in the chat or via other ways. Okay. Now, before we start, I would like to bring you a bit this picture and keep this in mind when we start the presentation. We'll bring you something new. And that's something new is like in that mid 19th century picture, a train, a fast mode of mobility, but it doesn't work maybe as fast and as smooth as you have with the old things. So this is a cartoon made in the 19th century where carriage holders were mocking a bit with how the locomotive was struggling to get along. This is exactly how to look at those kind of things. But you know how the carriage owners ended up. So please join that new exciting journey where we have multiple new possibilities to, in this case, mobility, but also public sector. So keep this image a bit in your head, back of your head, when we explain your new concepts, and try to be open for new things that could improve the lives of citizens. Okay, so on the introduction on the EPSI use cases, already mentioned by Nina and also by Pietro and Mohammed, we want to introduce that new blockchain, these decentralized ledgers or distributed ledgers for the good of public sector. Yeah? We want to have it as a functional or business improvement towards citizens, that they take control, secure them, easily move their own credentials to Europe, but also for businesses, that they have a way to better interact with the government agency, yeah, reduce administrative and compliance costs. And of course, what we also aim and why we introduce this is that we also believe that public sector can benefit, yeah, prevent document falsification, fraud, increase trust and security. Yeah? So all those actors, we strongly believe that they can benefit from that new technology. As mentioned, we are not only building their infrastructure, we are also building use cases. We want to directly implement this in the public sector together with their partners. We are currently, but that is a bit already I improved or extended. We are initially focused on 4 use cases, ASIF as the European Self-Sovereign Identity Framework, which we'll cover in a moment, on the diploma/educational credentials, document traceability, and also trusted data sharing, which Slovenia is also active in several things. And new use cases emerged last year, SME financing, asylum procedure, and the social security aspect. So those are the business areas where we are clearly implementing the first thing. They're not limited. We are now need to extend within the Digital Euro program to multiple use cases, with also what Pietro explained, the core capabilities. Coming again in the picture that Mohammed, but also Pietro shared, where are the layers or the use cases positioned? They are mainly positioned, of course, at the business application. We use the infrastructure, we use the change, we of course use the core services, and then we try to interact. And of course, we use the trusted registries. So the use cases are an implementation of the services, but to a specific business domain, like you will be presented it, identity, education, and also social security. So position our story in those light blue boxes, and that's where we want to focus. Now, before we start into diving into the different use cases and the possibilities that are in education and social security, I want to present you a new paradigm of self-sovereign identity and possibility for public sector. For people already a bit into this matter, it is of course a bit of repetition, but it is a transformation of public sector. So we wanted to, for people that are now joining public administration and looking at it for the first time, we would like to highlight this, those different things. Because if we look at what we use currently today, this is the traditional data sharing partner. You have a user that wants to interact with the service, what is happening. He gets normally transformed to a portal, a government portal or a data exchange portal. There they prepare some kind of information. That information is sent via a secure data exchange protocol to a receiver, and that receiver does something with them. So that is a traditional way that we see in some kind of domains, which are being used. The user is not central to this. It is the same point-to-point interaction that's been sent between 2 governments or 2 countries or whatever, less into cross-sector, mostly in the domain. So that is the traditional pattern of data sharing that we see today. But of course, we see some problems with that data sharing, but also with that identity approach. And I would like to highlight in a few pictures what we see as a problem. With that current model that we have, but also with federated identity, you get a potentially a great concentration of power into a few corporations. This picture says it all. You don't own your data. It's being controlled by other parties that can interact on your behalf, or do things with data that you don't have no power in. It is, of course, not only something that happens in the big tech, it also happens with certain governments, their approach. The data gathering of users without their consent, without their control is happening today. So you have exchange of data, but you as a user are not aware what is happening with data. And once that data is gone, you have absolutely no control what have been done with that. for the good or for the bad, of course. And some data is also locked up. It's very difficult to get data that you as a citizen produce or own or should own. Yeah, is locked up in databases. It cannot be accessed for information. Government information cannot be easily used in other sectors, like in banking sectors. So you have difficulties. That's why the image, it's well guarded. We hope so. But entering or exiting that information, interacting with other things is very, very difficult. And you get, of course, many silos. Data doesn't speak with data. You have a silo of government, you have a silo of banks, you have a silo of social media. If you want to interact as a user with those kind of things, you see that there is no combination. There is no, all things tend to be locked up in different environments. Linking all those environments tend to be a lot of spaghetti that you make. So we see that some governments are trying to have a link between certain government sources and other ones. That's only point to point, but extending and trying to make it scalable tends up to make this mess. Certainly if you go into cross-sector or cross-border with this kind of linking. And this image is also an illustration of the limitation. As a user, you cannot pass discretely information from one place to another. Why does your university today needs to know if you share that information, share the diploma with another university or your employer, former employer and your future employer? Why do they need to know that you are exchanging information? On the trust level, that is what is happening today. So we as user cannot pass discretely information. And what is also the problem today is that we own multiple identities, but they are stored in many other places which you don't control. You have a social media account, you have maybe an account in Slovenian government or in your regional government, you have maybe also in Belgium a temporary ID. So it's very difficult for users to govern all those kind of identities. Interpretation of the data is also very difficult. So we try to share information from banking towards government or vice versa, but you get mostly documents, PDFs, or even paper documents. How can you interpret this? How can you really know that it's trustworthy without again calling that service or setting up complex structures? And we share too much information. This is an example of a paycheck or a payslip. It contains much more information, but you need to share that information at certain stages and processes. They need to see, have you an income? Is it available to pay a loan? But do you need to know all the other information? So we are, as users, oversharing information. Another problem is that, of course, we at a certain moment give consent. You give consent for all those cookies, but how do you manage that consent? What if you don't want to share any more information with that bank or that retailer? How do you really can withdraw that consent as a user? So at the end, as a user, we see that you are a bit trapped in all the identity approach. You have no control and you're set up, okay, how can I find my way? It's making a lot of complexity into the processes. Now, therefore, and a lot of governments were already looking. Therefore, we needed to have another alternative. We are stacked up with the old data. The carriage that we used to show is not working to go into speed and to go very far. So we need an alternative. And the real alternative that it will be supported by EPSI and with other infrastructure is putting really the user into the central heart of everything. It's not about linking data sources, not about the governments that interact with each other. No, it's about putting the user into the central heart. And that's why Christopher Allen came out to the concept of self-sovereign identity. It's the next thing beyond user centricity. So it's not only user centricity, where you see a lot of concept nice thing. No, it's putting the user at the very center of the enunciation of identity. And then you get another model. You get a model like this, where the citizen is in central. He stores all his credentials that he receives from issuing parties like the university in this wallet. And from that, he shares that towards that employer. So the university and the employer have no direct link. So there's no potential correlation. And to have, of course, that information that citizen stores from in the data store, he checks the It displays ledger, EPSI ledger, but then you have multiple ledger, so you can easily share a lot of information, and they can also easily verify it. You get a diploma, an employer can check, yes, that is from the right university, yes, that comes from the right person, and is issued and right, it's not being revoked. There's also kind of information that is based on this model. This is, of course, fundamental different than the other picture that I showed in the traditional data share, because it organizes certain things on a different way. And that is also, of course, the big transformation that is waiting for you as a public sector to how to link this into this model. Because then there's also a lot of potential. You put the citizen in place, and then he can also use his information based, of course, in authentic sources to rent a bike, access e-health system, pay taxes, apply for a job, travel, start a business, all those kind of processes that require information from multiple parties. And that is, of course, the real beneficial part. How can we ensure empower that citizen that he can do those kind of things? And of course, at the organization level, have more control, more efficiency and simplification. Now, that is, of course, on the general concept of the self-sovereign identity aspect. That's not typically only EPSI, but we needed to see, when we started, we tried to see how European framework would benefit this kind of approach. Because going back in that model, you see, of course, what we don't see. There's the issue and relying party, you have no correlation. We have no access to information without consent, but we wanted to add some extra value from the public sectors, because an interesting part is how in this new paradigm, if we include also governments, you'll get, of course, a lot of government credential injected in the system that can be used in other contexts. Of course, we wanted to have it also in the way that is aligned with the IDAS compliance rules, that GDPR, and we see that it serves also a lot of simplification from public services. And of course, before governments interact, we want to also have a standardization. We don't want to be, as a government, interacting with multiple wallets. You need to have one way, even if there are multiple services. So that is also why we see an added value on building European self-sovereign identity framework. Because to be very clear, what we in EPSI are building is that layer below. We expect the green layer. We expect that the red layer is produced by the market, by the different players. So as Pietro rightly mentioned, EPSI is a market-friendly solution. It's provide the roads, but it not provide the cars or the transport aspect. That is something we do intact. Of course, we try to define again, together with the market, a different interaction between them. That you have specification, that you are building on stable aspects. So keep this in mind, what EPSI is producing, and what you do, of course, need to do yourself. In this picture, we'll not go into much details. That is also what we offer towards citizen, public sector, and private sector. So we go from in defining compliancy rules to securely anchor certain credentials, provide the base identity, link the IDAS with SSI, and of course, foresee the necessary public ledgers where those things, the diploma anchoring is stored, and implementation of different ledger capabilities to check issues and verification aspect. Maybe to go one back, to be very, very clear, if that's not clear, we don't store personal information on those ledger. It's about anchoring that information and let it, when the user presented that kind of information, let it easily be checked. Of course, we build on standards. So the SF approach is not something that we have completely thought into another aspect. No, it is building on the standards on the decentralized identity, on verified credentials that are now being built. But of course, we need to translate them towards a public sector context, and of course, to our context of EIDAS and e-seals, where you see in these kind of examples. Now, to be clear, and before you enter into this, what is the current status? So what in our view, we are going into from a centralized phase toward what we have called maybe a hybrid phase in this current moment, and towards a decentralized phase. What is a hybrid phase? Is that we presumably will see decentralized approaches being combined with centralized approaches. So as a bit as transition period, you will be as public sector also using your common aspect, trying to combine that with new things. But at the end, it needs to be something that the user completely aspect, and you need to enforce that every potential interaction will be going in that place. Of course, certain government-to-government interaction will be not going via the user, but most of them will be, of course, taking part of that. And of course, we see also a bit transition. We're going from the use cases where we now focus a bit on domain-specific things, where low trust is needed. It will gradually evolve to more generic use cases where high trust is needed, so that the user doesn't have multiple wallets. I have a wallet for diploma, I have a wallet for security, but they can combine things. But that's something that you need to see on the longer track and longer trail. Now, of course, if you look at the SSI concept, and now a bit challenging or very interesting times. I don't need to introduce this lady and also this code. But as you know, last year, the end of the last year, they announced that the European Commission, together with the member states, would be building a secure European e-identity. And that is also what is taken into place. So mid of this year, before the summer break, they also released those plans on building a digital identity for all Europeans. And that is also about the concept that I was mentioning. How can you provide a wallet to users that will combine multiple credentials from multiple sectors? You see driving license, but you see also medical records. You see the more social things, but also banking accounts. That is a power if we try to combine all those credentials to be used in multiple sectors. And then you get the same kind of ways that we interact, apply for bank load, where you can easily request that fully digital, checking the credentials in a secure way, and doing things that take a lot of applying for a bank loan is taking a lot of work, taking a lot of paperwork nowadays. How can we make it more flexible and more increasing? Now, before I say that, this is an opportunity, of course. The discussion will now be started, how the European digital identity will be implemented and how will be deconstructed. From our project, from an EPSI, we see that ESIF and EPSI have a big added value for this new approach. So in the coming months, and I think you'll be getting some examples from education and social security, we'll need to prove that the blockchain approach is really having an added value for this, and certain parts can be implemented in that aspect. So that's a very general introduction on self-sovereign identity. How we see this, of course, that we see ESIF as a framework, a set of functionalities that need to be implemented in a certain sector and a certain business domains. So the first instantiation of that new paradigm or the new concept was into the education area. And I invite now Henny to also illustrate that approach, how we implemented ESIF within that diploma context. Henny, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniel. If you would be my host to click problem on the slide, please. We can skip that. I introduced myself together with Luis Arino. I'm the co-convener with educational credentials. As Daniel was saying, allow me to take a functional and policy perspective towards EPSI in the added value of for education. I have to say that the title education, our main focus is empowering lifelong learning, self-sovereignty, and facilitating personal learning pathway through stackable, verifiable credentials. And we will support any form of any type of education, being it accredited, non-accredited, formal and non-formal. and also aligned with the main European policies and strategies and action plans you can see in the right side of the screen. So what we want to do within the educational area is to fully empower the citizen that becomes the focus and the center, gaining full control of their identity and data. And by doing so, combined with SSI, you can exchange value of your credentials and to truly tell people what you are worth in terms of credentials and what you are worth. Next slide, please. And let me state that EPSI, it's not only about technology. Of course, technology plays a very important part, but it's not the full story. It's also about engaging with an entire ecosystem of interested stakeholders in a measured, planned, and also strategic manner. And it must be able to support a very complex educational ecosystem within an EU framework, mentioning the self-sovereignty of member states towards their educational policy. And it must be able to support, enhance value to the existing policy DGs and services, and providing that citizen-centered experience. Next slide, please. A little bit of a background mentioned before by also by Nena, by Pietro, and also by Daniel. But I think that European Blockchain Partnership, it's a very strong partnership because of the involvement both of all the member states and the European Commissions. We are truly a partnership accomplishing this services infrastructure. And we use emerging technology like blockchain services to support the next generation of European identification and trust services. So let's say from the carriage to the locomotive, a new way of thinking to think about identity and specific business governance. And it's also about introducing a new trust framework for secure exchange of digital accredited credentials in Europe. And as Daniel was mentioning, also be very keen on the proposal for the European digital identity and the revision of the EIDAS regulation. And where we can see whether EPSI can enable this model through EPSI, instantiated by EPSI. And it's also, and I will dive into a little bit further along the way, it's a system of interlocking registries, and also the very important part of the governance is introduced. Next item, please. EPSI provides a set of infrastructure and services that allow member states to deploy cross-border services, and it's driven by a transparent governance model based on European Union principles like the GDPR and open standards, and of course fully aligned and compliant with European regulatory frameworks, as mentioned before, unlike EIDAS and the GDPR. And of course, as Daniel was saying, ESIF and diplomas are very strongly related to each other. It's all about exchanging value on a decentralized way through the means by SSI, and it covers an entire educational ecosystem. Next slide, please. And to keep in mind, it's all about creating an entire new ecosystem, but building it up on the traditional ways of thinking. So there's a lot of transition involved and a lot of governance involved in moving from a traditional to a hybrid into a new way of decentralized way of thinking. Next item, please. So let's have a look at the exchange of verified credentials using EPSI to manage self-sovereign identity and diploma, as mentioned before. The educational use case, the diploma use case, is built on generic scenarios built by the ESIF framework. So we're not reinventing the wheel, of course not. We're very strong tied to the generic business scenarios provided by the ESIF framework. The very simplified schema you can see here, but there's a lot of detail in there, of course. Next, please. We can combine trust and power provided by blockchain with the European Self-Sovereign Identity Framework. And ESIF, as mentioned before, is an extension of the standard self-sovereign identity framework and adding a link to European public services, the European Identity Trust Framework, the so-called IATIS Trust Framework, and privacy provided by the GDPR directive. Hence, in this scenario, the information is directly issued to the student that then will be able to share his or her digital credentials with third party, the verifiers, in a granular way. And blockchain and the EFSI ledgers, they will provide the trust to check and verify the digital credentials and status and issuer provenance. Next item, please. This is a very simplified slide about the scope and the purpose and the outcome, the desired outcome of the use case diploma. As Danny was mentioned before, you have to check the green and the red layer. It's the diploma use case. It's not an end-to-end solution. It provides reusable specifications and services for the next version of digital credentials, the so-called verifiable credentials, while we also have standardized ways on how information will be packaged and shared. And the information is semantically described with the so-called European, the Europass learning model, which I will further elaborate in a few seconds. And this is adopted by the member states of the European Blockchain Partnership. Next slide, please. Together with all the member states, we defined the necessary business scenarios for the use case. As you can see, they are very closely related to the generic business scenarios by ESIF. I won't go further into detail with all the business scenarios. Just remember that these business scenarios are now ready for piloting in pre-production phase, and some are planned in the next version of EBSI. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. One of the main key points we are working on, and have worked on, is mentioned also by Pietro, is interoperability. And to be more specific, interoperability on 4 dimensions, being technical, semantic, legal, and organizational. Next slide, please. And from a technical perspective, verified credentials are the common way to package the information to be issued or to be shared. And what about educational contents? Next slide. To ensure interoperability within a semantic dimension, it has been agreed to adopt the so-called Europass learning model. So member states have a common way to describe the achieved learning outcomes. Next, please. And tied to governance, a framework for issuing verified credentials has been established, so the existing governance of each member state within the educational area, but not only in the educational, but also on a generic level, can be deployed over EPSI. And we can distinguish different levels of governance, which improves flexibility. I won't go into much detail, but please keep in mind there are different levels of governance. So you have a trusted aggregation organization, you have trusted issuers, and also intertwined ledgers we can see in the sources of trust on the lower level. Next item, please. In our philosophy, it's all about moving an entire ecosystem to a new decentralized paradigm and putting the students and the staff in the center, and every entity, every actor, every role is key to ensure adoption of this paradigm. And so to move the carriage to the locomotive, you have to be very keen on adoption. Next slide, please. I think that's in a nutshell, the added value of a blockchain for educational. I will now leave the floor to Benoit, and I will return to you with Daniel to have a few words on adoption and the early adopter program. Benoit, please.
Thank you, Annie. Indeed, I'll take it from here to present what we're looking at with regards to social security procedures and their digitalization. If we go to the next slide, please. First of all, a few words about social security coordination, because I guess the audience here doesn't necessarily know what we're talking about. So what is it basically? These are common rules to protect citizens' social security rights when moving within Europe. In other words, we don't want to penalize people because they decide to go in another country to work, or because they are cross-border workers and they live in one country but work in the other one. And we have two regulations dealing with these rules, 883 and 987, and these are very old regulations. Indeed, Social Security Coordination were regulation number 3 and number 4 in the construction of Europe. So you can imagine that this idea of facilitating or at least making citizen movement possible without penalizing them is a very old idea, and it's very important for the free movement of citizens and of workers. It does not replace national systems. I mean, each country is completely in charge and competent to define his own social security system. They can decide who is to be insured, which benefits are granted, and under what conditions. Nevertheless, in all countries, there's a point where people go in pension, and the age can be different, etc. And what they're going to get from it can be different, etc. But the principle is the same. When people lose their job, they become unemployed, and they have access to unemployment benefits, etc. And when they get sick, they go to the hospitals or the healthcare provider, and they are reimbursed by the state for a part of what they have to pay. And these rules for social security coordination are built around 4 main principles. And the first main core principle is that you are covered by the legislation of one country at a time, so that you only pay contributions in one country. I mean, otherwise, of course, if you were, you have people working, for example, in 3 different countries, and I mean, it would not make sense, and it would not be practical and economical for them to pay social security contributions everywhere. But of course, then there's the questions on what is the legislation which is applicable to you, and that's part of the things that are defined in the regulations. You have the same rights and obligations as the nationals of the country where you are covered. That's the notion of equal treatment and non-discrimination, and these are really core values of European construction, and indeed these regulations are built on these principles. The third principle is that when you claim a benefit, your previous periods of insurance, work or residence in other countries are taken into account if necessary. For example, if you have worked in 3 different countries, then at the end of the day, when you ask for your pension benefits, then first of all, you go only to the last the institution in the last country where you worked, and this institution is indeed going to get information from the institutions in the other countries where you worked, and they're going to aggregate your periods of work so that at the end of the day you get a full pension. Same if you worked in different countries and unfortunately for you, you lose your job, then you can aggregate the periods during which you have worked so that the unemployment benefits that you're going to get are according to this aggregation. And the fourth principle is that if you are entitled to a cash benefit from one country, for example, unemployment benefit or a pension, you may generally receive it even if you are living in a different country. The typical example, I don't know, Belgian retirees going to live in Spain, where they can get their unemployment benefits there. It's the exportability principle. Same if you are a cross-border worker, you work in another country, you lose your job there, then you can still export your unemployment benefit, of course, for a limited period, etc. But at least that's the principle. So if we go to the next slide, then in order to prove your rights, the regulations have defined portable documents that you can carry with you in order to prove that you are indeed insured in your country of residence or the competent country. Indeed, to implement these regulations, the institutions have to exchange data. The institution for unemployment benefits in the data where you worked has to send information to your country of residence so that they know that you lost your job and you are entitled to rights. And in order to ensure that exchange of information between social security institutions, we have put in place, and we are putting in production as we speak now, a system called the SC, Electronic Exchange of Social Security Information. But that basically deals with the exchange of information between institutions. And as I gave the example of pension benefits, then the institution which is going to aggregate your rights for pension is going to ask the duration of your work in the other countries, etc., and what you are entitled to under the rules of that country, so that you can have one single final proposal for your pension scheme. And so, but of course, then, I mean, the interaction between the citizens and the institutions is not yet taken into account. In certain cases, you will need a portable document to certify your situation when moving. And the most well-known, I hope you all know it, example of that is the European health insurance card. When you go on holidays in a country and unfortunately you have to go to the hospital for whatever reason, you had an accident, then if you have your European health insurance card, you can prove with that card that indeed you have a health insurance back at home, and that indeed you will be treated in that hospital as the locals are treated. So you're not going to pay the full cost of your stay at the hospital, but you will pay as any other citizen of that country would pay. And that's a portable document in a way. And what is it? Basically, it is a certificate. It certifies that indeed you have a health insurance in your country. Another well-known, at least maybe less known, but a very important portable document is the portable document A1, a bit cryptic, but this is the one saying which legislation is applicable to you, and it is used by posted worker, because indeed you have regulations enabling a company, for example, based in Poland, to send a worker for a limited period of time to work in another country, let's say Belgium, but then without requiring him to pay for social security contributions in the country where he works. Of course, there are rules in terms of limitation of time, etc. But in order to prove that you are indeed a posted worker, according to the Posted Workers Directive, then you have that portable document that you bring with you. And all these documents today are still on paper or plastic for the European health insurance card. And you can imagine that the idea is to digitalize them. And we go to the next slide. So as I said, we have a system called SC, which is about the interactions and the exchange of information between social security institutions securely, rapidly. It improves the rapidity of the treatment of your case. It's more accurate because the data exchange between national authorities is done electronically, and it is built so that your private data are protected. But what is missing now is really the interaction on the next slide between the citizen and the institutions. And so what is S-Pass, the European Social Security Pass? It is a blueprint for the end-to-end digitalization of the social security coordination procedures from the citizen's perspective, because everything starts from the citizen and ends with the citizens. And in between, indeed, you have different institutions, but basically we want to digitalize the process for the citizen as well. What is important is that it's a blueprint for that end-to-end digitalization, which is relying also on other initiatives. The single digital gateway we'll see for the requests for these documents, SC for the exchange of information between social security institutions, EIDAS for managing the electronic identity, and it's not here, but it's the purpose of this whole session, EBSI as well, because guess what? In the study we've done, we realized that indeed using blockchain to manage these verifiable attestation, which are these portable documents, is what we think the best technical solution. And so the idea is to digitalize, as I said, the processes for the request and issuance of portable document. I asked my European health insurance card in with my institution where I'm insured, and I get it back. And of course, the idea is to ask it digitally and to get it back as a digital output. Of course, in all of that, as we've seen with other speakers, and we're going to need to manage our identity to be able to be identified, authenticated when we are mobile and when we process this information online. And then the idea as well, and that's where us from the social security perspective, we are very interested, is that indeed there's a point where there's a need to verify these attestations and these certificates that you carry with you. The healthcare provider has to be able to verify that indeed you are still today, at the moment where you ask for to be taken care of, that you are still insured in your country of origin. And when you have a plastic card, then of course it could be a plastic card that says you're still insured, but basically, indeed, you may have been revoked of your rights for whatever reason. And that's the idea, that real-time verification of your rights. And if we go to the next slide, please. And here you have the 9 portable documents that exist in social security coordination in different domains. You have the European health insurance card, you have the portable document A1 for posted worker, but you have other documents for pension, for unemployment benefits. And indeed, when we started to think of where should we start this digitalization process, then I mean, we made an analysis of the political priorities, the number of citizens impact, the complexity of the use case, so that I mean, if we deal with a complex use case, then I mean, when you can do complex, you can do simple. And at the end of the day, we thought that it would be good to start with the PDA1 for posted worker, because it is a priority politically also to be able to have that these documents digitalized and the verification of it as well improved and made more efficient. So the challenges, of course, as I said, is that you still need today a physical evidence, a paper document, and we would like to get rid of that. You still have the identification and verification part, which we have to solve, and this is what Daniel and Essif is working on, the identification part, and the verification. This is what we would like to solve with the ESPAS. We want to get rid of errors and frauds as well. So the idea, and that's why it's politically important, we want to fight against social fraud of people being working in a country without being properly a posted worker. And of course, we want to make the processes more efficient and cheaper. And then if we go to the next slide, we can have a look at what it is. So as I said, the idea now of the pilot is to first focus on the PDA1 and to digitalize the procedures linked to the request issuance and verification of the PDA1. Of course, later on, we're going to extend that to other procedures in portable document. And the next one, guess what, is most likely going to be the European health insurance card, because of the volume and because of the impact it has on citizens. Why, as I said, we want to prove the viability of the technical option. I mean, is it working well with blockchain, etc.? We would like to know about the cost, because later on we would like to do large-scale deployments. How much is it going to cost to the European Commissions, but more importantly to the social security institutions? We would like also to address the legal and organizational requirements. Do we need a revision of regulations? And what is going to be the impact on the institutions? And we would like to mitigate and reduce the risk. Who is, for the moment, managing that pilot project? DG Employment, which I'm representing, but also INPS, the largest Italian social security institution, which has been a kind of pioneer in using blockchain. They have done a proof of concept a few years ago of using blockchain in social security coordination. how we are setting up, we have set up a pilot organization with interested member states. Yeah, I mean, we have different work packages to manage all these objectives. And if we go to the next slide, another important point is that this is part of this is an initiative which is part of a larger initiative of DG Employment and the Commission, which is called the Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan, which has been released this year in March, if I'm not wrong. And indeed, Pillar 12 is about social protection. And there, the need to digitalize and to facilitate the mobility of the workers, and especially with regards, I know that we more and more teleworking, etc., and we have more and more nomad workers who can work from anywhere. So that the importance of dealing with the social security coordination is even bigger. And so our pilot is part of that action plan. It says it should start in 2021, which is the case. And we are now, as we speak, exploring that digital solution based on EDSI together with Daniel and other colleagues. And if we go to the next slide, so the visibility of this project is at the level of a commissioner and the parliament as well, and the council, etc., because this is very important. So if we look at now the posted workers to be journey, a bit simplified, but I mean, if you look at an example of Georgios from Greece who would like to go to Belgium to work for a duration of 1 year, because his employer is sending him there, he's going to prepare for his travel. So he's going to request a PDA-1 and get it back in electronic format. Then he's going to move to his new country, and there's a possibility that he's going to get inspected in order to be sure that indeed he is a posted worker and he has his PDA-1 on him. And that's the whole procedure that we would like to digitalize, and the verification part with the inspector is the other aspect. And if we go to the next slide, where we have a more functional view, so indeed you will have the citizen or his company requesting through the single digital gateway a PDA-1. And by the way, of course, the request for the PDA-1 is already part of the single digital gateway regulation. There's an annex describing all the use cases that needs to be digitalized, and the deadline is for 2023. So this part of the request through the digital gateway is taken care of that initiative. And of course, then the next step is that when the institution is issuing the PDA-1 in an electronic format, first of all, the citizen is going to store it in his EU wallet, which is being defined by the revised eIDAS regulation. And he's going to write the transaction as well. I have issued to that person a PDA-1 on the blockchain. And as the blockchain is a distributed and shared database, then when Georgios is going to go in member state B, he will get inspected. He's going to show to the inspector his PDA-1 in his wallet under the form of a QR code, which is going to be scanned by the agent. And then the agent is going to be able to verify not only that indeed Georgios has a valid PDA-1, which has been signed by the right institution in the right country, but also that this PDA-1 is still valid, has not been revoked previously. And so the identification, the principles on which it is based, that the identification is going to fully rely on SIF, on an SIF compliant OneNet. For the identification part, we realize that there's no need to introduce a unique number to identify the mobile citizens, because originally there was that idea to create a European social security number. No, with the eIDAS regulation and something like SIF, you don't need that for the identification and authentication of the people. And of course, the verification is going to leverage on verifiable attestations, as has been described before. So basically, it's not so different than a student card in a way, or a student certificate, or a university certificate. Yeah, and And that's what we want to achieve, in fact. And if we look now at the next slide, which is going to be a call to join the pilot if there are people from social security institutions or ministries in the audience. Indeed, we have already a lot of countries participating in the pilot or interested in the result. If we go to the next slide, there they are. So it's already a good, and of course you have Italy as the leading country. So we already have a lot of interest because as I said, of the political importance. But if we go to the next slide, there are different level of involvement in the project. You can participate as a subject matter expert. The institutions say, yes, we're interested. Yes, we have the expertise in social security procedures. And so we participate in meetings, we share knowledge about our legal and administrative environment. We contribute to drafting of deliverables, but we are not actually involved in the technical activities. On the other extreme, full involvement, you are a full participant. You participate to the definition of the pilot by contributing to the deliverables as the experts do, but you implement the necessary changes on national applications to be able to write on the blockchain and to offer interfaces for the citizen to get his PDAs in his wallet. You participate in the tests of the solution, and you install or you relying on the existing EBSI blockchain node. And then in between, you have service user, where indeed you can reuse the blockchain services through APIs provided by another institution in the country. For example, the institution already managing the existing node in the country. And yeah, so for the moment, we are still looking for more full participants in order to be able to test the scenario of sending posted workers to another country and verifying them. And that's the end of my presentation. I will be happy to answer questions later on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Benoit. So you have now learned about the different use cases and also the call for action or call for participation Benoit has done. We'll be having one last piece, and that is about join the EPSI early adopters on identity and indication together with Henny. Henny, this one is for you, I think, first one.
Yes, as I mentioned before in my presentation, we think that adoption is key. Whether it's the educational ecosystem or the social security ecosystem, you have to get all stakeholders involved, and you have to, let's say, seduce them or convince them that EPSI can truly add value. And to establish that, our philosophy is a two-way track. It's engaging top-down, but also bottom-up. I will go into detail on the top-down track, but for the bottom-up track, we introduced half a year ago an early adopters program to learn by doing what EPSI is providing and how it can be used in piloting member states. Daniel, I think you can take the next slide.
Indeed, if we look at it as at the track, we started back in 2020 and even further ahead of time. When we evolved in Q1 with the demonstrator, then we have indeed that SEFCAL, which Nina has mentioned, that also Slovenia is participating. We went towards piloting out the framework, learning packages, and then when EPSI version 2 was released in a pre-production setting, we introduced indeed that early adopter program that started at the beginning of this year, and Mohammed already raised, some people are active, and that's something that we want to extend. We want to have more to see how people really actually build. We learn a lot of the actual use, and then we need to evolve in the next steps, in the next years, towards a bigger program, Digital Europe program, where we want to evolve this as a stable building block that can be used in multiple contexts, public sector contexts, but the other contexts too. And as a part of that early adopters, we reached out in the identity/education domain to a lot of partners, partners that wanted to join and try to see how we can collaborate, use EPSI, and interact diplomas, credentials, identity credentials in aspect. Those are some of the partners already involved in that, not exclusively, but we see that we have now a lot of projects with multiple partners already engaged in our project. You see some university, of course, where we see from different countries, and those partners want to interact with each other and want to test up, okay, how can EPSI be implemented? Those interaction university don't only work together alone, they also come with their supporting governments. They also come with their supporting solution providers. So it's a lot, again, like Henny mentioned, it's about mobilizing an ecosystem, and that's what we are trying at this third step to do. Okay, this one is for you, Henny.
Yes, as I mentioned, there's a two-step philosophy. Daniel was mentioning about the early adopters program, where you can learn by doing and engaging with the member states and with the stakeholders like citizens and the educational institutes. But we also are engaging on a different level, let's say a top-down level. And what we want to do is to bring together all the key initiatives of the European education ecosystem and engaging with the policy DGs and all the key stakeholders for adoption, like the one you saw on the previous slide, ECHAR. Also the ENIC-NARIC network, JANT is a very important stakeholder, and also MREX ELMO. And we have, there is, I must say, policy interest from several DGs, from DG Ample, like Benoit, of course, is mentioning European Social Security Passport use case, also together with the member states. And there is an agreement between DG Connect and DG Ample on the collaboration on the Europass learning model. And we are exploring the further evolution of Europass on that level. We also are engaging with DG EAC, Education and Culture, where we combined talks between their flagship projects, like academic ID, etc. And they are highly interested. And we are planning a coming meeting to evaluate potential alignment of our flagship projects like EBSI and also the flagship projects of DG EAC. And from the DG Connect side, to be specific, H4 and F3, if you are familiar with those abbreviations, they are looking for identity pilots on education, and also started contacts through us, through our conveners with DG EAC and DG Employ. Next slides for you, I guess, Daniel.
Maybe one to add in that last one on the EU digital identity pilots with H4 or with the IDIS unit, better know. We have also started discussion with Benoit and his team to see how they can also implement this. So we're trying to bring this all together in that sense. Huh? Do I take it, Henny, this one?
Yes, you can.
Okay, thanks. So as you've seen, so we are now at the multi-university cross-border pilots, a whole bunch, but it's about combining multiple actors. So a large-scale pilot to mention on that aspect, with all projects that are not funded by us, but are interesting to participate and to interchange that aspect. We had the first wave, which was also the project that Mohammed was mentioning. He's Slovenia, Maribor is also participating, Digital Europe for All. And with multiple, that was the first learning group, trying to see, okay, how can we have? They gave a lot of feedback on the specifications, a lot of feedback also on technical specs, and also, of course, policy. And now we are extending that group, what we have called the Wave 2 actors. They have now been trying to see how to explore, to learn about our specifications. So we have a lot of material that is a bit more kept internally, but they have checked in the exploration phase, and now they are moving into the design phase. Next week we have a design workshop where we try to see, okay, how would be a cross-border multi-university pilot work, and how do we interact to build something so that by the end of October we can release the different aspects. What are those figures that we are mentioning? So wave one, we had 10 projects participating, 10 projects / member states. So you need to see project as national organization about Ministry of Education, together with Ministry of Interior for the identity, together with some university, together with some stakeholders, together with some solution providers. Those are the first that would be taken. Slovenia was also part of it, Digital Europe, but we see Netherlands, we see also France participate. There's a lot of projects participate until April till now. Now they will be joined by 18 projects that will also focus on the new project, trying to bring this into life, the real action. And together, of course, 10 plus 18 is not 22, but we have now motivated 22 countries that want to really interact. Some stay at the track that they will interact individually with EPSI, which is also possible. But the 22, which is for us very useful and very learnful, that they want to see, okay, if I have a credential fund in Belgium, how can I easily use it in Spain, or easily and back again use it in Italy or in Slovenia? How those things interact? A lot of issues came above: semantic, legal, organizational, technical. But we want to have those kind of challenges to learn more and more about how production ready is EFSI and EPSI to make it to the next stage. I think this one is for you.
Yes. So in a nutshell, we have it's a whole journey we covered within the last hour and a half. But to recap, is what is the purpose and the desired outcomes of the use cases to be more specific. For sure, giving control back to the citizens. As part from the view of education, control to manage their own educational credentials, and significantly reducing verification costs and improving authenticity, trust, and enabling real interoperability. And as Danny was mentioning, also, of course, we are very keen on building cross-border services, because we believe that the true value of EBSI is within that cross-border area. So we want to provide reusable specification and services to manage educational attributes, being that from an education perspective, but also applying to all the other policy areas mentioned before. And we want to spark the ecosystem adoption, mass adoption of EBSI by the EU, where EBSI becomes the common underlying building block that can be used for your policy area. Next, please.
This one is also for you, Annie.
I think so. Yes, if you, it's all about you and me and stakeholders like the higher education institutes or social security institutes, and you have to have the benefits and the added value of all those stakeholders involved. You have to have that on the table. You have to frame it in the right perspective. And if we take the holder wants to enjoy mobility across border, being it in the educational sector or in the social security sector or in the health sector. They want to truly to enjoy mobility across border. The issuer, for now, is the example by the university. You can lead a change to lead it to a very decentralized approach to exchanging credentials and reduce friction and interaction between member states, between higher education institutes within those member states. And it's also about the ministry, the trusted accreditation organization. It's about reducing friction in interaction and also security in data shared. and the verifier, it can be the mistakes can be reduced and protect against fraud on a global scale. The diploma fraud is staggering. So we truly believe that EBSI can truly enable and reduce that diploma fraud. Next slide, please. Yes, it's about, let's say, education then reimagined. It's a new trust paradigm, and we believe it's a process of change. And we would like you to join us, as Daniel and Bernard were mentioning, on our piloting and early adopter program. We believe this is a way of learners really enjoying mobility cross-border and reducing costs and fighting fraud on a global scale. And there are many also people and stakeholders involved in and interested in EBSI, also across the Atlantic Ocean. To mention a few, there's highly interest of the Digital Credentials Consortium, but also specific states like Canada, who wants to run a proof of concept between EBSI and their member states. So we want you all to join us, and I think this is the end of our presentation, Daniel. I'm not sure.
Indeed.
Indeed.
So that's a warm welcome or warm call up to indeed join that. Just to mention that we are mainly public sector driven. So if you have indeed a proposal that we interact mainly with the universities or with the different ministries involved, so we reach out. We have now started wave 1, wave 2 is now already started and engaging design workshop. But in the next weeks, months, we'll be probably launching what we have called wave 3, so that new people can join and have that aspect. So don't hesitate to reach out to us to try to see that. And of course, coming back what Benoit has mentioned, you can also join the pilots that are also doing from also being in the public sector. I think, Nina, that's it from our side. So we are open into Q&A. But I wanted to, of course, thank you and thank Henry and thank Benoit in this meeting. And I would like to also see, if you want more information, but I'll share that in the screen, see what it is. And let me end up with the code of somebody maybe you need. So I found it a bit maybe romantic, but I think maybe appealing. So if I code rightly, so this translation of Franz Ferdinand, my heart is no longer shall remain austere, and from the inspiration in its store, fresh flowers spread fragrance far and near. So hopefully we have inspired you a bit in a new fragrance and no far. So it's up to you to take that inspiration, work together with us, and start a new transition together with you. So it was always mentioned by France in a few centuries ago. So it's up to you, Slovenia, to join us.
Yes, thank you very much, Daniel, Henny, and Benoit. Thank you for this really exhaustive presentation. I actually have two questions which I don't see because they are copy-pasted, but in any case, you have them in the chat. And please look at the chat if you can give a response to them.
Okay, I will check.
Please check it because I don't. I cannot open this on my telephone.
Okay. No problem.
There are people interested in the traceability use case, and of course, unfortunately, our colleague in charge of that was not there. But I'm sure we can provide his details so that he can be contacted. No.
Indeed. And also applying to the second question, somebody else indeed more interested in the EPSI tax use case, so how we can participate. So I think via Nina, we can certainly provide or see how you can interact with those use cases. So we have presented indeed 3 use cases, but there are 6. So we have specifics focused on that domain. Please reach out and we'll bring you each use case has a convener, and each use case has somebody, an expert team that can be helping you on this. I think that would...
For the traceability use case, maybe I can explain that we will use all that was made until July, and then try to figure out how to adapt this for our national e-notary use case. And this will be our work in next months, probably October and November, and I hope that we will find some solutions until December. So this would be one of that our national early adopters use case. And we already talked with the Ministry of Justice that we will support the development of e-notary use case on the national level. So this will be somehow of compromise between traceability use case and our national use case on e-notary. We also have one best practice from German use case, so maybe we will invite the people that were developing this in Germany to contribute to our development of the use case as well. How is the interoperability of SSI identity from EPSI with other SSI ledgers? Can you reply on this, Daniel?
That's a nice one, indeed, and this is also a big challenge that we have today. We have implemented EPSI on a success rate, but we see that we have multiple variations in those kind of things. So we need to still to work on interoperability, but that applies to several networks. But maybe it's also a warm welcome, a warm invite to join the session of Mohammed. I think it will be in the next days. He will be, and it was one of the things that he explored, is how EPSI can be interacted with the Hyperledger Areas network. So how those things, they made up, I think, a very interesting first interaction to see that. Because at the end, EPSI will not be the only network that will rule them all. It will be an important network on the European scale, mainly public sector driven, but it will need to interact via the user or via interoperability with other networks. Some mentioned the Chinese PCN. So that will be something, but also maybe private initiatives. Presumably, or probably, banks will be also having constructed their own network with their own government rules. So that is a big challenge, and that's something that we need to take up. But of course, we need to see that we are not too driven into specific technology aspect. We need to have standards on this. So don't see that you all need to have Hyperledger aspect. We need to be as public sectors transparent and open enough to interact with everybody, and not to be closed in one specific vendor approach. But said that, it still needs some time on aspect. I think, Henny, we are focusing mainly on the business specification, that they are clear. And then, of course, the underlying technical areas need to follow.
Okay. Super. Thank you very much. For any other questions, we are open. So if you, in the further communication, send it to my mail, I will be happy to share with Daniel, Henny, and Benoit, and we will try to make complete answers, what will help us how to come closer to the usage of use cases. So thank you very much again. And I hope next time we will be able to meet you in person. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.